we'll go ahead and get started. It's my great pleasure tonight for the Ciocca Center weekly happy hour to welcome Jessica Carson, who is our favorite guest we've actually had as a part of our small business series from the fall. Jessica's specialty is the entrepreneurial mind. And so she led a workshop, I think back in October or so, where she was talking about the duality of the unique skill sets that entrepreneurs have. So I won't steal any of her thunder as far as that goes, but I left thinking a lot about the businesses that we work with and the people that I work with, and how we can all harness the positive sides of these skills, and how oftentimes only the negatives are enhanced. Most excitingly, her book, Wired This Way, came out on April 1st, which you may have noticed is maybe not the best time to start a book tour. So I remember hearing excerpts from the book back in the fall. The praise for it has been pouring in, talking about how entrepreneurs truly are unique in the way they think about the world, and how their energy and their talents can be harnessed to have incredible outcomes. And so she's going to present tonight about how those talents can be channeled, particularly in times of crisis, and how over the course of human history, how a lot of times people have been forced to be creative, which, as you all well know, you have been in ways you probably didn't want or think were possible about a month ago. So without further ado, Jessica Carson.
Thank you so much, Brian and Rachel and everyone who's joining. I am so glad to be back with this group. It's been one of my absolute favorite groups to work with. So let me see. I'm not going to talk too much about myself because Brian did such a beautiful job. But in short, I am the proud new mama of a book, Wired This Way, which is on the light and the dark within the entrepreneurial spirit. So it's looking at both the science and the lived experience of why entrepreneurs may struggle with things like mental health challenges, stress-related illness, burnout, existential stressors, all of these sorts of things more than non-entrepreneurs, but why that may actually be their blessing and their gift, and that they are not broken, they are not wired incorrectly, but they do need to learn how to harness the potency of all that they are. And so if any of that resonates with you, would love for you to check out Wired This Way. You can also see some of my contact information at the top of the screen there. My website, my email, and my Instagram handle, where I'm sharing a bunch of updates. So I am full-time Director of Innovation at the American Psychological Association, an expert in residence at Georgetown, and I'm currently quarantining in Amish country farmland, Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So that was me social distancing with some cows a few days ago. So for this talk, which may be a little bit more of a happy hour light workshop than a talk, if you would like, please feel free to now grab a few pieces of paper or some pencils or pens or whatever you have around you. If you don't have anything, no worries, but there will be some opportunities for a little creative exercise. All right, so getting started here, we all know pandemics are nothing new. Pandemics have been with us really since the birth of humanity, and yet despite all of these damning, dooming, devastating pandemics, the spirit of humanity has really not only continued to survive but thrive. And so when this all started, I got really curious about looking at the historical context of pandemics and global disease and crisis, and got quite curious about what it was about the ingredients inherent in a pandemic and the quarantine and everything that comes with it that actually seems to breed creation, breed creativity, breed innovation. And so that's a little bit of what we'll be talking about today, and how we can take a cue from pandemics past into how we can become more creative ourselves during this time to not only make it through the other side, but really make it out the other side improved, in every sense of the term. So here are a few of my favorite examples of brilliant creations that were made in the middle of pandemic. So for example, the Italian Renaissance followed the Black Death, which killed about half of Europe. So you take something that killed half of the population, and it was followed a few years later by one of the most creatively fruitful epochs in history. During the Great Plague of London, Sir Isaac Newton, well, he wasn't a sir at that point, was studying at Cambridge University. The whole city went into quarantine for 2 years. He went out to his parents' farm home in the English countryside. And it was during those 2 years that he came up with his theories around optics, calculus, and gravity. And it was on his parents' farm that the infamous apple tree was. During the plague of 1606, Shakespeare wrote King Lear, and most recently, the Spanish flu, I found this interesting, was shortly followed by the Harlem Renaissance, because people were escaping the South, both to escape the flu as well as slavery, moved to the North, and with it brought the Harlem Renaissance. So we see multiple examples of the creative richness that can come out of these really quite dark times. And so when we look at nature, and I like looking at nature as a template for pretty much anything, we can pretty much understand all things through nature. It seems that the recipe for creation is quite consistent. It requires darkness, isolation, nutrients, and time. Because what happens when you take a seed, you plant it in some dark, moist soil, you cover it up, you separate it from everything else. And in relatively short order, you have a little plant spindling towards the light, quite in contrast to the soil from which it came. And so if we look at this framework, if we look at this sort of equation, and we say, okay, well, we have the darkness and we have the isolation that has been forced upon us, thrust upon us in the form of quarantine. What we need are nutrients and time. And it seems like the time is also going to be forced upon us, but maybe the more interesting thing is giving ourselves the permission to take the time. Maybe the harder thing for some people on this call, myself included. So we'll briefly go through 4 phases really of the quarantine process that I've been thinking about, how it relates to both the unique wiring of entrepreneurs as well as putting things in historical context. So the first phase is reflection. So if anybody on this call has been feeling like they're kind of in a funk over the past few weeks, now coming on about a month or a little over a month, there's actually a really adaptive reason for that. And the adaptive reason, so if you think about what coronavirus has done, it's really forced us into this collective depression, where even for those of us who are not depressive, typically, we have been forced to isolate, forced to basically not engage in work as much, forced to really rethink our energetic allocation. And while depression sounds like, well, that's just an objectively bad thing, it's really not. And evolutionary psychologists believe that the reason that depression has not been weeded out in our collective gene pool at this point is because it confers adaptive advantages onto the people who carry it. And those adaptive advantages take the form of being able to slow down, sort of isolate from society, survey the environment, and select 1 or 2 key issues that they would like to focus their energy on. Now, there's a reason that so many great thinkers and creators and builders across time and history have been prone to depression. And it's because when they go into that depressive place, they're able to kind of bring everything down to the ground and focus on really kind of ruminating on a book or a poem or a play or a painting or coding an app or working on a complex business model that they otherwise would feel too frenetic and distracted to do. And so what the coronavirus as a forced collective depression is allowing us to do is sort of simulate the conditions of depression so that we can kind of cull the advantageous qualities without necessarily ruminating on why nobody likes us or why we're a failure, or those other sort of maladaptive sides of depression, which certainly do exist. And to be clear, I'm not trying to make light of depression, saying that it's only a good thing, but when harnessed properly, it can really instigate brilliant works of creation because of the energetic reallocation that it offers. So as the first little exercise, and this is something that you can just kind of do in your own head, or you can write it down if you'd like, is think about 1 or 2 key problems you'd like to stew on in this time, because depression is characterized by rumination. So if you can choose to ruminate on something productive or proactive, what would that be? You know, and for me, it is finding creative ways to promote my book, since I can now no longer, you know, get up on stages or, you know, have parties to celebrate my book. I have to think about creative ways to do that. So that is one thing that I would like to ruminate on, if you will. And then step 2, and this is a very important piece of my work and a big part of what I talk about in the book, is reflecting on both the light and the dark parts of your personality that would either make or break that goal. And I'll explain what I mean. So here's the way that I've chosen to sort of map this out for myself. So my goal is to promote my book. Now, the light parts of my personality that help me do that are the things about me that will enable me to meet that goal. So I'm resilient, I'm adaptive, I'm curious, I'm resourceful, I'm flexible. I can kind of figure out a lot of different ways to creatively problem solve. Those are some really light parts of my personality that are proving very helpful right now. Some of the darker parts of my personality is that I get very impatient. I want everything to be done yesterday. I always feel like I'm falling behind. I can get distracted because I have so many ideas. I can get frustrated when I don't meet my goals as quickly as I want to. And I can become a little bit too ruminative and obsessed over the creative projects I'm working on. So those are some of the darker parts of my personality that I need to keep in mind. Now, the interesting thing about even my dark qualities is that you can see how they're connected back to my light. My tendency to be obsessive is also the source of my success, but it can also be the source of my, more dysregulated qualities. And so what I've put in the middle, and that you might think about as well, is some practices that will help you merge the light and the dark parts of your personality. And so for me, right now, that is taking the form of a few daily meditation breaks, as well as trying to get out into nature at least once a day when it's not like tornadic outside. Today was a little tricky with that one, but so this is not something you need to share with the group right now, but something that can be a very helpful and also very nurturing framework. Because notice, I'm not saying my dark qualities are all bad, because frankly, the opposite side of curiosity is distraction, right? Distraction and curiosity are kind of one and the same. They're just mirror images of each other, where one is more productive and one is more unproductive. So moving on to the second phase. Second phase is reallocation. So what do I mean by reallocation? I mean that this quarantine provides the opportunity for us to reallocate how we are divvying up our energy. So what's interesting to think about, again, using the metaphor, the framework of nature, is how this quarantine is sort of acting as a natural innovation stabilizer. So basically, the premise of ecological balance says that when any system in nature is thrown out of balance, there will be a negative corrective force that brings it back into balance. So that may look like a wildfire. That may look like a change in prey-predator ratio to kind of balance things out. And what this does is it provides an opportunity to sort of create balance and reallocate the scales, if you will. And so what we can think of right now is how we were allocating our energy before quarantine and how that might have been a little bit imbalanced, and how we are currently allocating our energy while in quarantine, and how that may actually have forced us to move into more balance, whether we like it or not. And so I'll give an example of this. So here are 4 different domains across which you can think about your energy allocation. How much time do you allocate for family, for occupation, so your work, for recreation, which is things like socializing, going to yoga, extracurriculars, painting, reading, those sorts of things. And then 4th is dreams. How much time do you allocate making your dreams a reality? So for me, writing this book was an allocation of my dream energy, if you will. So the way that I would invite you to think about this, if you want to, if not, no worries, is to think about these 4 different domains as 4 trees. And you can draw 4 trees on a piece of paper if you want. Now imagine you have 12 units of energy to allocate across your entire life. You can imagine these units of energy like trees, like leaves on a tree. So before quarantine, you can see that my energy was mostly focused on work, on occupation, and on my dreams, on making my book become a reality. But I was not allocating a lot of energy towards family or towards my hobbies, my extracurriculars. And so while I was successful in a professional sense, or, it kind of looks like I was successful, I actually wasn't really cultivating my friendships like I wanted to. I wasn't cultivating my hobbies like I wanted to, and I wasn't spending as much time with my family as I wanted to. Now, what you can do is you can draw 4 trees once again, if you want, or any other framework you want. You could draw buckets or circles or what have you. And think about how those 12 units of energy have been rebalanced across those 4 domains of your life. Now, for me, those trees actually became quite balanced during quarantine. And that's not to say that yours have to be balanced exactly. But for me, because I'm quarantining with my family and I still have my job, and I am frankly socializing and connecting with my friends with more consistency than I ever have. And I'm attending to things like yoga and walks more than I ever have, because I have time to do that. And I still have time to do my book. That means that actually my energy has been reallocated in a very balanced way. And so what seems like a crisis can actually be an invitation for reallocation. So again, these are exercises that you can think through now or on your own time, but this is just a framework to think about these things. 3rd phase is restructuring. Now, this is one of my favorite parts of the presentation, and I've done this one before, and this seems to resonate for people. So the cool thing when we look at creators across history is that many of the greatest thinkers, the greatest creators, always acted as if they were in quarantine. And now I'm saying this as someone who is admittedly like a huge introvert and can be like very hermity. Like I could honestly spend 2 weeks alone and not even realize until someone's like, have you left the house? So I may not be the best person to say this, but for many creators, they find that creating more of a quarantine schedule or regular schedule for themselves can be very helpful. So looking at a few examples. So here we see Beethoven. His day consisted of, and I didn't make these come from the interwebs, breakfast, composing, dinner, walk, reading, supper, sleep. Okay, so pretty balanced, regular day. Here we see Darwin. So a little bit more diversity in his day, but a very, very similar structure. We see walk, breakfast, work, lunch, reading, letters, nap, 3rd walk of the day, work to tie up loose ends, idleness, spending time with family in the evening, reading. And I love that he lied awake solving problems in bed. Now I do that. I can't say I do that in a super productive way, but I assume he was more productive than I was about the lying awake in bed solving problems piece. My Angelou, again, very similar, a combination of meals, working, time with family. Here we see Freud, sleep, seeing patients, lunch, walking. Once again, we see walking in the evening is time for family, reading and writing for journals. And finally, here we see Dickens. Again, this is really nothing more than to underscore the consistency of these diverse creators, is that their days basically consisted of meals, walking, writing, reading, thinking, and working, and time with family. And so, and again, the one consistency being walking, which I find so fascinating, because there is research that has shown that walking acts as this like brilliant palate cleanser, like a literal like cognitive palate cleanser, where if we sort of break up our days with walks, it acts as this really nice refresher in between various activities. So I invite you, if you so choose, and no pressure, but this is, my quarantine schedule, or at least what I aspire to every day. And so you can see that I love to sleep. And I actually probably sleep even a little bit more than this, if I'm telling the truth. But I eat 3 square meals a day. I do certain tasks best in the morning and certain tasks best after lunch. And so I've learned what those are. Try to get in time in nature, time for family in the evening with our, we're watching movies every night. I have been finding that for me, even though clearly I suck at art, I really enjoy it and I try. And so I find that very sort of cathartic and fun. So again, you can create this on your own if you just draw a circle and basically make a little tick mark for the, every hour of the day, and then create your own schedule. So the fourth and final phase that we'll be going through today, and then we'll have plenty of time to chit chat and answer questions and do whatever we please, is regrowth. And so these images I found so fascinating. So these are screenshots that I took of a video of a wildfire. So basically the first tree where you see the kind of crunchy yellow grass was before the wildfire. The fire happened, there was death and decay, then you start to see little sprouts coming back, and then at the end you see this lush greenery. And what's interesting is that the forest was actually healthier after the wildfire than before the wildfire. And so, I know that right now it's a hard pill to swallow to say that a lot of the things that are falling away, whether those are businesses or jobs or, stock portfolios, is a good thing. It is interesting. I have found it a productive reframe to think, if something is falling away, maybe is it falling away with the intention of something better taking its place, something even more lush, even more fruit-bearing. And so to this end, and I'll sort of skip to the end so you can see what I drew here. And again, you can draw this however you want. It doesn't have to look like mine. But I think it's nice to think about what intentions we want to set in terms of the seeds we want to plant for regrowth. And so if you want, you can draw 4 little seedlings or 4 flowers or 4 circles or whatever you want. But the 4 intention seeds we want to set are: 1 for personal regrowth. So basically, coming out the other end of this, how do we want to be personally renewed? Do you want to come out of this more patient? Do you want to come out of this more creative? Do you want to come out of this with a closer appreciation of simplicity? Whatever that personal intention is that you want to come out of this, write that down. Second is planting your intention seed for creative regrowth. What do you want to create on the other side of this? Now,
well, thanks.
For some of you, that may look like you want to create a whole new business. For some of you, that may look like you just want to create a new, you want to create a blog, or you want to create you want to write a book, or you want to start a podcast, or you want to, it can be even smaller than that. Third is planting your intention seed for professional regrowth. So in terms of your work, your business, what intention do you want to set around regrowth for your professional life? And then finally, intention seed for your social regrowth. So social can mean friends, it can mean family, it can mean romantic partnership. So basically anything that is interpersonal, what kind of intention seed do you want to start around that? And then step 5 in this process is selecting your nutrients. Because if you remember at the beginning of the conversation, we talked about how we also need nutrients in this process, right? Like you cannot plant a seed in soil and just expect it to grow. You have to give it sunshine, you have to give it water. So what are those nutrients going to be that will help this regrowth truly blossom in an even healthier way than before? So you have to add up the fertilizer right now. So really kind of beef that part up. So is it going to be meditation? Is it going to be breathing? Is it going to be yoga, prayer, art? And again, I drew it as these 4 little seedlings with my, again, I clearly not an artist, but I try. And then the sun bringing the nutrients, which for me have been taking the form of nature and meditation and a lot of rest. So none of these exercises have to be done even remotely in the way that I have presented them, but I hope that they provide some useful frameworks to think about how to reframe this pretty cruddy moment we're in as actually a period that can be used as a creative catalyst. And I will suggest a little plug for my book. If the exercise on the dark and the light of the personality resonates for you, you can see that the book is structured into these 10 creator archetypes, each with their own dark and light qualities. And the idea, and I know you probably can't read any of this, but you can see sort of that framework. The idea in studying these different creator archetypes is that we all embody many different creators, you know, the ambitious creator, passionate creator, intuitive creator, creator who wants to self-actualize, and that each of them has these extraordinary blessings, but also some liabilities that are not necessarily burdens, but do need to be integrated and need to be harnessed mindfully. And so that's very much what this book is on. And so if within 72 hours you send me an email, or you can also follow me on Instagram. Again, that's jessica.m.carson on Instagram, and share a little update with some progress that you've made. I will send you, mail you a free letter with some Wired This Way stickers and a bookmark and a watercolored card with a quote from the book that I made. And again, don't expect something to put on your mantle, but I did it with a lot of love and gratitude. So with that, I would love to just open up the forum for questions or feedback or thoughts or things that struck you as powerful or interesting or awful and terrible. So, I mean, open to anything.
So thank you so much, Jessica. Just as a way of proceeding, if you have a question right now, go ahead and put it into the chat. And everyone is muted at the moment. So if you want to ask your question that way, fine. But if you put it in the chat, we'll make sure we get to it. Thank you so much for going through that. I think that as expected, hopefully this brought a lot more optimism to folks when they think about the challenges that they're facing right now. And that some of the greatest artists over time have kind of done this to themselves in a way in order to be creative. So there is some positivity possible there. Also, while the questions are gathering, I wanted to give a little plug for next week's happy hour. I think it's very much on topic with regards to the regrowth phase. So Adam Muchler with the Kedar Group, somebody that I speak to very frequently just about the small business mind and the entrepreneurship mind, as well as networking and how to make the most of your opportunities. He and I were talking last week about Phoenix strategies. So the imagery being once the mythical bird burns down, then of course it turns to ash and then rebuilds itself. So next week's happy hour will be, what is your Phoenix strategy? So very much of what Jessica was just talking about with regards to planning your regrowth, planting the seeds, figuring out the nutrients, all the rest. I think a month ago, we were talking about that first sunny Saturday and what it's going to feel like when we're allowed to leave and conduct business as we want. And I think that both what Jessica's had to say, as well as what Adam is preparing for Monday, will be very much of that spirit. I think as we said each Monday, this is becoming a little bit less raw, what's going on. And now is our chance to really start preparing for that regrowth. So if anybody has any questions for Jessica, please go ahead and throw it in the chat, or we can have you ask live if that's easier.
Well, I love that Phoenix strategy. That is so cool. I also love Adam. He's great. So that'll just be an all around fantastic talk.
A couple of artists I was also thinking about as you were speaking. One is James Joyce, who I don't know if you're familiar with his creative process at all. He almost went blind and was forced to lay face down with his eyes covered for like 2 months in Trieste. And that's where he thought of a lot of his works. Again, not something he asked for, but that led to his creative process, which I thought was on topic anyway.
Yes. Oh, I love that. I mean, and it's really an invitation for, because in these routines of the great thinkers, they had this time carved out in their day for, I mean, some of them called it meditation, some of them called it idleness, some of them called it contemplation, but really space for stillness. And that to me has been the greatest gift. And let me know if any questions come through, but in the meantime, I'll just share that as someone who is so achievement oriented and who constantly feels like I'm falling behind, I was talking to my friends about this recently. I feel like one of the hidden gifts that this time is giving us is sort of this, this permission to fall behind because everyone's in the same boat. And I mean that in the most positive sense, like permission to be still because everyone is still. Like no one is running a marathon right now. Everyone is in the same boat. And there's something about that that gives us permission to really just kind of, loosen up the expectations and be okay with moving a little bit slower and being a little bit stiller. And frankly, I know that's the medicine that I very much need. So, oh, and Greg, it looks like, sure, I've got a question. All right, we'll wait for.
Sure. Hey there.
Hey.
Am I coming through loud and clear?
Loud and clear, Greg.
Wonderful. I'll even, sorry about that. I didn't mean to have my background on.
I love
that's a long story, but that probably works. I actually, long story. I'll share it. Why not? So yesterday I was hosting a virtual birthday party for my mother, and so anyway, so I put up the background there to entertain the crew, and that's I guess a little bit of a nod to some of the categories you talked about today, but more to the point. So I will say I'm dressed up here, was ready to take a jog, but decided to join this happy hour, and I'm very glad that I did. So Jessica, this is a wonderful topic. I guess. So a little bit about me. So I do a lot of direct consulting and support to entrepreneurs and small business owners. And obviously there's a lot of chaos and frustration. And some of the tips that you shared here will be incredibly useful for those conversations. I guess 2 questions I have. One, where do you get the book? Where can someone access the book, or perhaps if there's some materials, and I mean that very seriously. There's some materials that you might have available for me and for others to use. Again, given that Amazon shipments might take a while, and obviously some folks' pocketbooks are more constrained these days, and you know, a lot of these frames and models and ways to approach sort of taking advantage of structuring structuring your day, you know, setting out objectives for this unique opportunity we're in. You know, that's all structure that obviously can fall apart very easily. What guidance or thoughts or tips do you have for getting back on track, you know, that may go beyond just like, you know, that perhaps the usual advice, you know, stick to it or whatever it may be? Any thoughts you have on what to do if you get off track?
If you fall off the wagon?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, so a few things. I mean, oh gosh, and I say this with the full self-awareness that I am a recovering self-critic who, you know, always thinks that everything needs to be done and done perfectly. But I think a big part of coming out of this time okay, in all senses of the term, is really embracing this this notion that things will not and should not look the way that they always have, and that even once we come out, there will be a new normal, right? And like the world is constantly changing and is never the same, and that the world will not be the same, and we will not be the same. And so frankly, I think that if there are you know, I could tell you, oh, well, you can get an accountability coach, and you can put things in your Google Calendar, and you can, you know, set your schedule. And those are things, you know, like you could find on any productivity blog or whatnot. But I think that kind of the more interesting question to me, and the scope of the work that I do around practicing things like self-understanding and self-acceptance and sustainable self-care, is noticing why certain things are falling away, why you may be feeling a resistance to certain emails in your inbox or tasks on your schedule, and getting curious about really what is essential and what is not essential. And I don't mean that in the government sense. I mean that in the sense of the scope of your life. Because now we do have a little bit more flexibility for curiosity, and curiosity in terms of directed towards self. And so if you're finding that for a few days in a row, and I'll give you an example. For a few days in a row, because yoga is my practice of choice, is my physical exercise practice of choice, and I teach yoga on the side. And for a few days, I was just finding like I really didn't want to do yoga. I just did not want to do yoga, and I had energy. I just didn't want to do yoga. And so for the first few days, I was being hard on myself, like, oh, you're not exercising. That's an interesting choice. But what I was finding was actually that my body and my energy level was asking for a different kind of movement practice. And so I was finding that once I replaced the yoga with hiking and with, and this may sound silly, I posted it on Instagram, but basically me just like dancing and moving and just movement practice in my room, that felt like a more fulfilling way for me to channel my energy. And so I think that can kind of be applied to anything that we're falling off the wagon doing. If you're falling off the wagon with something related to work, maybe get curious about why that is and how you can make subtle or not subtle changes that make it feel a little bit yummier, or if not yummy, then palatable. But just, I guess the summary of that answer is, get really curious and compassionate towards yourself right now. You know, kind of treat yourself like your own therapist. And one of the practices that I've been using for the past really year and a half or so very regularly is talking to myself like I would talk to my child if I had a child. I don't have a child, but
Sure.
And taking that very compassionate stance.
Yeah.
And to answer your very kind question about where you can get the book, you can get it on Amazon. You can get it on Barnes and Noble. If Amazon is a little bit slow. You can also get it on my publisher's website. If you want that link, you can email me and I'll send it.
Okay. And presumably only hard copy versions available.
Because that was another great point. So there are affordable options. You can get it for $9.99 on Kindle. You can get it for $19 paperback, or you can get it for $29 hardcover.
Got it. Great.
Yes. Thank you.
So Jessica, we had a question come in. Somebody chatted to me privately. It says, are there any specific meditation and time allocated for meditation? So within as you're building out your wheel, have you found any strategies for finding specific times or even methods for meditation?
Yes. Yes, completely. So I think one of the big mistakes that people make when they start meditating is they think that they need to meditate for like 30 minutes once a day or 20 minutes once a day. I have different meditation practices that I do, and some of them take as little as a minute, some of them take 5 minutes, some of them I considered it for 30 minutes. So I would say in terms of how to integrate it into your schedule, just start with only a few minutes, and also loosen up to the idea that meditation will look like whatever it is meant to look like for you. So I actually don't have I didn't train under a specific meditation practice, but I found that when I close my eyes and I do steady breath, inhale 4 counts, exhale 4 counts, and I just get still, that I find myself in a meditative space that has no name and it has no formal training or anything attached to it, but it's what I need. And so I will usually try to do a little something in the morning. I'll try to do a little something in the afternoon, usually like after lunch. And then I, after we get off here, I'll probably do a little something before I have my nightly glass of red wine.
This is a happy hour after all. Some of us have started.
It is a happy hour.
So Jessica, we have one of our students actually joined the chat, and he had said, the adjustment has been difficult for his friends and him, just figuring out schoolwork and an abnormal schedule. Could you just speak a little bit more to that idea of actually scheduling it out and carving out time? On a personal note, I know that my 8-year-old daughter found great solace in the distance learning environment that she's been thrust into, at least knowing what's coming next. So even if it's like, quiet time in the afternoon or tech time or schoolwork or whatever it is, just knowing that there was a schedule there was helpful for her to adjust
this. Yes. And so to be clear, is the question, how do you go about thinking about how to structure your schedule?
I think so. I think it maybe more of a comment than anything, but he seemed drawn to the idea of balancing their schoolwork and everything else for someone who is a sophomore in college at this point.
I see. So this is where I get very curious about tapping into our innate and intuitive ability to regulate our own energy. And so what do I mean by that? So we are basically big balls of energy. We are energetic machines. That is what the body is. And we have this incredible ability to renew our energy, to fill up our energetic tanks. And we have this also remarkable ability to deplete ourselves. And so what I've gotten curious with in creating the gallop to my day, the rhythm to my day, is to make sure that if I have to engage in something that feels a little bit more depleting for me, like answering emails that have no sort of creativity attached to them, or just kind of like logistical emails, those sorts of things deplete me, then I will counterbalance that with a little brief stint of time that fills me back up. So if I know that I'm going to be answering emails and doing work for 2 hours, then I'll take 30 minutes and I'll do a watercolor. I mean, and I mean, literally mean like I will sit down and just like, and I'm terrible, but like for me, that feels renewing. That gives me energy. I have found incredible solace and energy in really childlike, and I say that positively, childlike creative activities. So like I have Play-Doh on my desk, and you know, I will have a doodle pad next to me. These little things can actually sort of either be that palate cleanser or recharge us. So getting curious about, you know, if you can almost assign, to give you a little bit more of a practical tip, if you're looking at the, let's say, 12 activities in your day, and some activities are very renewing. So you put a plus sign next to those. Some activities in your day are like explicitly depleting. You know, it's like really no one wants to like work on their taxes. That is depleting, but it's a necessity. And then some things are kind of neutral. And so maybe you put like a squiggly wavy line next to that. And if you look at how you've scheduled things through your day, if you notice that you have a whole chunk of time where you're doing either neutral or depleting things, then slot in some of those positive renewing activities. And if you don't have enough positive or renewing activities, get yourself some Play-Doh. And I see that someone commented, yeah, stack of Play-Doh containers on my desk too. That is awesome, Greg. And yes, Greg, the recording will be available and shared. It is being recorded. And I see in the chat, I find this very validating. Thank you. I find that microaggressions from colleagues that I usually don't let get to me are getting to me. I have started to limit conversation, but it is tough. Oh yeah. Okay. So here's the thing. So basically, we are all like snow globes. And we are like snow globes who for basically our entire adult lives have been in a state of shaken upness, because we don't really ever have permission to just stop. And right now, we are sort of in this time where the snow in the snow globe is like settling to the bottom. And all of a sudden, we're seeing what was in the snow globe all along, right? We're seeing ourselves as we are without all of the distractions of the life things. And what we see in the snow globe is at once beautiful, but the light also has the shadow. And so what is happening for a lot of people is if they're not used to seeing what's inside the snow globes because they don't have practices that force them to cultivate stillness and mindfulness and self-reflection, they're not going to like what they see. And so a lot of people, and excuse me if you hear the train going by, a lot of people are dealing with shadowy parts of themselves, not bad parts of themselves, shadowy parts of themselves that they've never really had to look at, and will take that out on anyone around them. And again, that is not, you know, we can't, it's like they're doing the best they can with the resources, the emotional resources that they have. But that doesn't mean that you have to let those microaggressions get to you. And so are people going to be stressed? Are people going to be triggered? Are people going to be projecting their junk onto you? Sure. And probably now more than ever. But now is also a time to get really thoughtful and very curious about boundaries, right? Because we have like this nice boundary built in by this quarantine where we literally don't have to go into the office. We literally don't have to go into the classroom. And so thinking about, okay, what feels good about these boundaries? What feels not great about these boundaries? And then once we do re-emerge into the work environment, how do you want to carry some of those learnings with you? How do you want to carry some of those boundaries and those practices with you? Because frankly, as someone who is deeply empathic, and that has not always served me well, like that can be very depleting for me. When I'm in an office environment with like passive aggressive stuff going on, I get extremely depleted, extremely depleted to the point that it affects my physical health. And so I feel you on that question. And I would just get curious about the contrast of how that feels from the perspective of sitting at home versus, you know, when you're going to be back in the office and dealing with that in person.
Thank you so much. So we do try to keep this to about an hour. And again, I hope this was a breath of fresh air. I think that it's addressing some of these challenges in a very different way. The last couple of happy hours have been trying to sort through all of the funding issues and those kinds of things. And I think that for many of you, I'm guessing that the hurry up has already happened and now comes the wait. And so I think that we are afforded the opportunity to focus a little bit more on internally and on how we are doing as opposed to just how our business is doing. But to that end, I also have a resource that came through today that seemingly would be helpful. So I'm just going to throw this in there. I guess Intuit put together a new program that helps you sort out in the same way that TurboTax helps dummies like me do their taxes. You're clicking boxes that are only relevant to you and helping you navigate some of that space. So I thought I would share that with you just before we close. And also just to remind you, as I said, that next week will be Adam Muchler and What is Your Phoenix Strategy, which I think will be a little bit less focused on our individual selves, perhaps, and maybe more back on the business. But Jessica, thank you so much. You were one of the first people that came to mind when I started really thinking about the ways that we are internalizing all of these challenges. And I think it's extremely timely, as we all have been in this frenzy for the last month or so. And now as we start to prepare our Phoenix strategies, but also just to try to be better business owners and better family members and better parents and whatever your situation might be. I think that your talk was inspiring in many ways. So thank you very much. I have placed an order for Wired This Way, and when I get it, I look forward to reading it. But as I think about my little pie and how it's been reallocated, I'm back to reading actual books, which feels kind of good, and I look forward to reading yours shortly. So thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us. Once again, this is the Ciocca Center for Principled Entrepreneurship from Catholic University. And for those that are unfamiliar to us, I'm about to drop a link. If you had this referred to you somehow and you're not getting our newsletter, there's a way for you to sign up for the newsletter there. And we look forward to continued engagement. We are still doing our one-on-one consultations virtually, of course, with business owners. And the newsletter is going out every Friday with things like the Intuit link that just came across my desk today, kind of what we're reading, what's helping shape our thinking, and perhaps most importantly, what we're hearing from business owners like you that is helping us provide recommendations to other business owners. So we view ourselves as a true resource center for our students, but also for the small business community in around DC and beyond, such that we can continue to add value and help navigate these difficult times. As I say each week, we don't pretend to have all the answers, but I think we tend to ask pretty good questions and hope to come to some consensus together. So cheers, everyone. Thanks for joining us. And Jessica, you're the best. When you come down off the mountain, we'll look forward to seeing you in person sometime soon.
Oh, yes. Likewise. Likewise. I'll be bringing a baby sheep or cow with me. So
Perfect.
All right. Bye, everyone. And please do reach out.
Cheers.
Bye.